Mistake number 1, starting with an annual fee credit card as your first credit card. This is the most important first step that you need to get right. Sometimes you may get caught up in the shininess of these awesome welcome offers that come on some of these higher tier cards, but considering your first few cards are going to be cards that you never want to cancel throughout your entire credit card journey, you definitely don't want to be stuck paying any kind of annual fee every year, especially one that's $695. Even on a much smaller scale than that, I fear that a lot of people actually get stuck with these store credit cards that might have tempted them whenever they were at a store shopping one time, because whether they know it or not, these cards may come with an annual fee, and if that's the first credit card that you ever opened, like I said, you don't want to have to cancel it. Even if that annual fee is just $50 a year, if you don't get any value from that card after that first year, then you're going to be wasting a lot of money every single year. Remember that we're talking about keeping these cards open forever. That's a pretty long time. I mean, just imagine that you had these cards from 20 years old to 80 years old. That's 60 years with this credit card in particular. At $50 a year for 60 years, that's $3,000 that you've basically just thrown down the drain because you don't use this credit card. Although that's not a lot of money, imagine if that annual fee was $100, $200, or even $500. Obviously, that's going to add up really quick. Also, there are some companies out there with some credit builder cards that require you to pay an annual fee of, say, like $39, for example. And obviously, these are pretty predatory in nature because you can definitely get cards without an annual fee that do just the same thing. Paying the small annual fee is generally not going to get you anything special, and it's really just a way for them to get money from you while you're still young in your credit card journey. So obviously, you definitely don't want to start with any card with an annual fee. So the first thing that I would check before applying for any credit cards at the very beginning of my credit journey is if that card has an annual fee or not. You could always get started with a card like the Discover It secured card, which does not have an annual fee, but I've also talked about some other options that you can check out in this video after if you're interested. Just make sure you do all of the research you can on your starter credit cards because they are the most important first step in setting you up for your financial future with credit cards. On the same topic of your first few credit cards, mistake number 2 that a lot of people make in the early stages of their credit card journey is applying for too many cards too quickly. People are going to have a lot of different opinions on this topic in particular, but generally, if you're just getting started in the credit card game, you do not want to be applying for a lot of cards very quickly. The reason for this is because whenever you do apply for a new credit card, the credit lenders are going to perform a hard inquiry on your credit report. These hard inquiries aren't necessarily a bad thing considering they only stay on your report for up to 2 years and don't really affect your credit report at all after a few months. But these hard inquiries are a part of the new credit category of your credit score, and that's going to make up roughly 10% of your overall credit score. Although these hard inquiries aren't a big deal in the grand scheme of things, you have to put yourself in the lender's shoes to see how this is bad in the beginning. If you were the lender and someone came to you with no previous credit history and started asking for 2, 3, 4, 5 credit cards in the span of a couple of months, you're probably going to be a bit hesitant to give them all those credit cards because you're not sure exactly what they're going to put on those cards and you're not sure if they're going to be able to pay you back because they have no previous credit history. The bottom line is that you just don't want to look very risky to these lenders in the very beginning of your credit card journey. So in that way, a lot of hard inquiries in combination with a low amount of credit history can be a very bad thing, especially when it comes to getting approved for credit cards down the line. Not to mention they are going to be dinging your credit score every time they perform a hard inquiry on your credit report. So both of those go to show that you don't necessarily want to add a bunch of credit cards right at the beginning of your credit card journey. If you've been in the credit card game for 10 plus years, then a bunch of hard inquiries on your credit report are not going to affect you as much. But obviously when you're just getting started, that's a completely different story. Also, another point here is that if you do apply for a bunch of credit cards very quickly in the beginning, your average age of accounts is not going to grow very much, and considering this makes up 15% of your credit score, you're going to want that to be as good as possible. My recommendation would be to wait 6 to 12 months after getting your very first credit card to really understand how they work and let that credit history build up before you apply for your second credit card. Then I would wait another 6 or so months after getting that second card to really again build up that credit history. But then once you do apply for that third one, you can start to ramp that up a little bit, maybe apply every 3 months or so, unless you really understand the credit card game and you want to really start farming these welcome bonuses. There's really no need to rush the credit card game. I know a lot of us really want to get as many cards as we can quickly, and I definitely have fallen victim to that. But just make sure that you take it slow in the beginning and really understand what you're getting yourself into. Another big thing that people get misled on by credit card companies is how much of their credit card bills they need to pay off. This is going to lead into mistake number 3, which is only making minimum payments to your credit cards. When you're first getting started with credit cards, you may get a little bit confused as to what balance you actually need to pay off because they give you 3 main options. Those 3 balances being the minimum balance, the statement balance, and the current balance. Let's work backwards on those so we can understand what each of those mean. So starting with the current balance, this balance is what I like to think of as a live look at your actual balances right now. So this is basically the total amount of money that you owe to the banks at any given moment. However, this isn't necessarily the balance that's going to be due on your next due date. If you were to pay this balance off at any given time, you would reset that balance to 0, which is not a bad thing, but you do not have to pay off this balance to avoid getting a missed payment or start paying interest. The balance you do have to pay off to avoid those things is going to be the statement balance. And the way that you should think of a statement balance is more of a snapshot of time instead of a live look at your current balances. The statement balance includes all of the purchases, fees, and interest that you've accumulated over the most recent billing billing cycle. So this is actually the minimum balance that you have to pay off to avoid paying interest. This is kind of confusing because you would probably assume that the minimum balance is the minimum you have to pay in order to avoid all these bad things on your credit report. But obviously that's not the case, and this balance, your statement balance, is the one you're going to want to pay off every single month to be in good graces with the credit bureaus and all the lenders. So of course, what is the minimum balance then? The minimum balance is what you have to pay to avoid a late fee or a missed payment. However, you're still going to accrue interest if this is all that you pay. So if you've had your auto pay set up on your minimum balance, this whole time you've been paying extra interest on each one of your credit card bills. Again, to reiterate, the only thing that paying off this balance gets you is an on-time payment on your credit report. But that's it. It doesn't give you anything else. Luckily, now you know this, and if you have been paying off the minimum balance only every single month and haven't seen your credit score go up, now you know why. So to avoid ever missing any payments or having to pay interest on your balance, make sure you set your auto pay to pay off the statement balance by or before the due date. Now we understand what balance you need to pay off, but how much money should you actually be putting on these credit cards? That leads us into mistake number 4, which is maxing out your credit cards. A lot of people understand that maxing out your credit cards is a bad thing, but I don't think a lot of people understand how close they are to maxing out their credit cards, even if they make early payments to their credit cards. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of it, we need to understand why the amount of money that you put on your credit cards can be so detrimental. The number we're focused on here is your credit utilization. Your credit utilization is going to make up 30% of your credit score, which is obviously a huge chunk. To calculate your credit utilization at any given time, you're going to want to take the total balances that you have on your credit card, divide that by the credit limit you have on that credit card, and multiply by 100 to get it in percentage form. So if you have a balance on your credit card of $4,000, but you do have a $5,000 credit limit, while you're not maxing out that card, your credit utilization is still going to be 80%, which is really high. We want to keep this number as low as we can, below 10% ideally, and I keep mine at about 1 to 2% to find that sweet spot of increasing my credit score the quickest. But now you may be saying, well, how in the world am I supposed to use my cards if I can only put 1% of my credit limit on them? And the way that you can still put as much money as you want on your credit cards is by making early payments. A lot of y'all may be doing this already, but if you're not focused on when you're making those early payments, you could still be having a really high credit utilization and not knowing it. That is because your credit card statement balance is reported to the credit bureaus at your statement close date. And your statement close date is different from your payment due date and will usually fall about 25 days before the due date. So even if you're going in there a week or two before your payment due date to make an early payment, the damage has already been done to your credit score because your credit utilization was reported on your statement close date. To know what your statement close date is, you're going to want to go ahead and pull up one of your previous statements. So as you can see on my Chase Freedom Unlimited statement that I have here, instead of looking at that payment due date at the very top, you're going to want to look towards the bottom where it says opening/closing date. The closing date is going to be when you want to make all of your early payments by. And then the payment due date is when you should set your auto pay to pay the rest of your statement balance off every single month. Because in doing so, you're going to avoid paying interest and missing a payment like we talked about previously. So for me and on all of my cards, I set my auto pay to pay the statement balance off on my due dates. But at the same time, I also set a reminder on my phone for a couple of days before the statement close date to go ahead and go in and make an early payment to those cards to bring the utilization down to 1 to 2% like I talked about. So to actually report a low credit utilization, you have to make these early payments before the statement close date and not just the payment due date. Now that we have the foundations covered, we need to talk about some of y'all that might be getting a few credit cards at this point, because if you are doing so, you presumably are not using your oldest credit cards because in reality, they kind of suck in comparison to the newer ones. But mistake number 5 is one of the biggest ones that you need to get right if you want to have a high credit score. That mistake being closing your oldest credit cards. Like I said, whenever you start to get multiple credit cards, you're going to start to realize that your oldest credit cards kind of suck in comparison, especially if you get started with a secured card or a student credit card that might get you 1% back on everything, but that's about it. So naturally, you're probably considering closing those oldest credit cards because you never use them anymore, and that seems like a logical decision. But wait, you definitely do not want to do this, and here's why. The number one reason is because your oldest credit cards are the backbone of your entire credit card setup. They're going to be the ones with the longest credit history, and they're going to be able to prop up your average age of accounts to the highest it can possibly be. For example, if you've been in the credit card game for 2 years and you just got your second credit card a month ago, if you went ahead and closed that first credit card, your average age of accounts would go from 2 years or whatever it is to down just to 1 month. Obviously, those numbers might not be 100% accurate, but you can see how that could really sway your credit score by doing so. On top of that, every time you close a credit card, you are eventually going to be deleting all of that credit history from your credit report. Granted, this does take 7 to 10 years if your credit card is in good standing with these banks, but it's still something that you'd rather avoid than having it happen for no reason. The fact of the matter is that you should probably never cancel any of your no annual fee credit cards, not just your oldest ones. The only thing you have to do to keep these credit cards open and active is to put one charge on them every 6 months or so. And unless these no annual fee cards are really weighing on you emotionally or something, then there's really no reason to cancel them. All you have to do is set up auto pay to pay off your statement balance every single month, and then put a couple of charges on it every single year, or just put a subscription on it and never really think about it. However, if you do have annual fee cards, this is a completely different story. This is obviously a big reason that I said at the very beginning of this video that you do not want your earliest credit cards to have annual fees. But if you do have a credit card with a large annual fee that you're not getting use out of anymore, your first step should still not be to cancel the card. The first option you should look at is whether or not you can product change it or downgrade it down to a no annual fee credit card. This is something you can do with every single lender, but some card families are harder to do this with than others. For example, one line of credit cards that has a very bad downgrade path are going to be Amex's charge cards. Those charge cards being the Amex Green, Gold, Platinum, and technically the Plum card, I guess. But within the personal charge card family, the lowest tier that you can get to is the Green card, which still has a $150 annual fee. So these are examples of cards that you might just have to cancel if you're not going to get any use out of them anymore. But for the most part, you're always going to have a downgrade path available. Like for example, if you had a Chase Sapphire Preferred card that has a $95 annual fee, but you don't really use it anymore, then you could downgrade that card into a Chase Freedom Flex or Chase Freedom Unlimited that has no annual fee and you can keep it open forever. My main point here is that I don't want you to stress out and cancel a card for no reason and have some serious adverse effects to your credit report afterwards. You basically want to keep the average age of accounts as high as you can with the most amount of on-time payment history possible. But if you're in this last stage and you're starting to add some more credit cards to your setup to build out the foundation of your core credit card setup, and also if you do want to travel the world for free, then I would check out this video next where I talk about the only 5 credit cards you'll ever need to travel the world for free. As always, me and Odin both want to say thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you did enjoy, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll catch you guys next time.